All right. Welcome to Modern Slavery in Agriculture. We are so happy to have you. Please take a moment to go down to the bottom of your screen and select the interpretation, the globe icon. And if you are bilingual, you can remain in the main channel. If you need English, please select that one. And if you need Spanish, select that one. We will have a time at the end to take questions and answers. In the meantime, you can feel free to go ahead and put your questions so you don't forget them. And then when we get a chance, we will answer them. In the chat, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to put your name and where you're coming from and how you found out about NFWM and for this webinar. Our presenters today will be Julie Taylor from National Farm Worker Ministry. She is the organizer. And then with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which you will probably often hear them referred to as CIW, we have Lupe Gonzalo and Marley Monticello. So thank you so much. As I said, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And welcome to the webinar. And I forgot to mention, it is National Farm Worker Awareness Week. So we're glad to have you learning about farm workers in this important week.
So welcome everybody. You just heard from Rose Green Flores, the Director of Communications for National Farm Worker Ministry, and Rosie Shahar is our administrative assistant. She's dealing with some logistics, but we wanted to start off today with just some basics about human trafficking and modern day slavery. And so I'm going to take us through just some real sort of just fundamental kinds of things. So you can see on the screen, the Department of Justice defines human trafficking as a crime that involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services or to engage in commercial sex acts. The Department of Justice also notes that other names for human trafficking are trafficking in persons or modern day slavery. These incidences are investigated by the FBI in partnership with an initiative from Homeland Security. And so this is how these things are pursued. So I want to talk about victims of labor trafficking. They have been found among the nation's migrant and seasonal farm workers, including men, women, families, or children, as young as 5 or 6 years old, who harvest crops and raise animals. We should note that human trafficking started to be a special initiative in 2005 under then President George W. Bush, who sought to combat trafficking. The focus of it was sex trafficking, not immigrant laborers who work in isolated areas. But in recent days, more and more labor trafficking has been exposed. And so that's what we want to focus on today. Victims of this form of trafficking, labor trafficking, specifically in agriculture, include U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents, undocumented immigrants, and foreign nationals with temporary H-2A worker visas. Modern slavery is common in agriculture because it is seasonal and migratory work. It depends on crop availability and how much how much there is to pick, and that can change depending on weather or natural disasters or things like that. It's also common in agriculture because it's usually in isolated, sparsely populated areas, very often behind wind trees and bushes and things that protect you from even seeing the fields that are out there. Although in a lot of places you can also see the fields, but very isolated work. Farm workers live in isolated housing, and so and are reliant on people to take them to grocery stores and things like that. And so often it's an unseen, a hidden population. And it's common in agriculture because of farm labor contractors. So these are people who work for growers and large companies that own the farms and the fields, and very often just secure a farm labor contractor and have them hire the workers that they need and oversee them. And so very often in these human trafficking cases, growers and owners often hide behind the fact that they've hired somebody else to handle their labor force, and so they didn't know what was happening and they're not responsible for that. So it makes it very easy to exploit these workers. The other thing that's common in agriculture is that there's too little punishment. In 2020, only 6%, 32 of active human trafficking cases focused on holding traffickers accountable for forced labor crimes. It's an abysmally low number. In 2021, the Polaris Project reported that there were 2,679 cases of labor exploitation in the agriculture sector in the US. And that report also showed a 70% increase in reports of trafficking of workers with H-2A visas. Just to say a little bit about the Polaris Project, they are an organization that started in 2007 to operate a national human trafficking hotline. And so they have built the largest known data set on human trafficking in North America. The statistics are often hard to keep up with, and it's hard to determine from year to year, because even when human trafficking cases are reported, there's a long investigation process and then prosecution to the point that there is finally some judgment in that. And as you can see, so many from the previous slide, so many never even get that far. So we wanted to share a testimonial from an H-2A farm worker in Wauchula, Florida. They said, "I lived in a chicken pen made out of thin metal material that was in bad shape, and it had bunk beds with 30 to 40 other people. Anyone was able to enter." And you can see from this picture on an H-2A farm worker housing in Blackshear, Georgia. No windows, mattresses on the floor. It's dark there, but mattresses on the floor, no windows for ventilation. This is in Georgia, where it's hot a good part of the year. And that's the housing that they have. So this is a form of the exploitation that they go through. So I want to urge you at some point, if you haven't already, to watch the National Farm Worker Ministry short film, Modern Slavery in Agriculture. It features the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and some footage from their modern day slavery museum. They open that up to share with us. You can watch it. You can watch our video on YouTube. You can go to our website and click on YouTube and see a variety of resources, but specifically take time to watch that and hear from them. And so at this time, I want to turn the presentation over to Marley and Lupe and have them share with us. We're so grateful that you're here today.
Our pleasure. And just on the interpretation, we'll both be doing parts of the presentation. And for those who need English from Lupe's interpretation should just make sure that they are firmly in the English channel as opposed to the bilingual channel. Is that right, Rose?
Yes, yeah. Our translator will be doing both. So yes, make sure if you need everything in English, make sure you select the English button.
Great. Entonces, Lupe, si quieres comenzar.
Muy bien.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Julie. And thank you everyone that is here today in this video call. My name is Lupe Gonzalo, and I am part of the staff or coalition, workers coalition in Immokalee, talking a little bit about the history of modern slavery and agricultural industry. We're seeing a map. We have in Immokalee, we have a museum where we show a lot of information in regards to modern slavery and things that we've worked on. So we're starting to see a map here. This shows a river where there was a plantation from English slaves in the 70s. This is the San Juan River. This is how we know it, and this is here in Florida. So this is basically where there were slaves. There were cultivating corn, rice, and other products. And in this same map, we can see what is now Palaca, right? This is the same river, like you can see, this is the same place right now, you know, in modern times, but now in 2005, also there was a case of modern slavery as well, with it's a contractor named Evans, in which this contractor had dozens of workers that were enslaved, and they were working, cultivating potatoes and other products that are, you know, done or cultivated in winter. In 2007, Evans was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison on conspiracy of slaves. Also workers that he had there, it was workers that didn't have a living place, didn't have a house, didn't have any financial resources. So it was basically the slavery, the cases of slavery that were happening in this year. So as we see, it was 300 years of forced labor, in which the workers that didn't have a voice, the workers that were afraid of reporting these abuses, they live in slavery, modern slavery conditions. Even if the laws change, right? There, we can still see that at the passing of the years, this labor, this forced labor continues to happen, especially in the farming industry. So we have a very big history in regards to forced labor and slavery in this farming, So this is one of the reasons why the coalition started to organize workers, because going case by case, it wasn't something that was ever going to work. This was something just very difficult, that we were going to be able to reach a case of slavery, and that was going to reach the Supreme Court. So that's why the coalition started to look for a way on how to prevent these abuses from happening again. And that's why we started to organize workers with roots in the community, workers that also the same have encountered different situations of abuse, salary theft, and no health protections, no safety equipment or protection. Workers like women that we have sexual harassment every day. This is our day in, day out. So that's why that's why we did this on the coalition. That's the story of the coalition, fighting to change the condition in the workplace, to be able to treat just as human beings, basically. This is where this comes, the fight from the coalition. And later, we started to focus this on directly towards the big corporation, to be able to get this power and bring it to our place of work. I'm going to now send this over to Marlene.
Moment that for workers looking not only at their environment in Immokalee, but starting to look to where they could build power in order to change some of these conditions. And so that's when they turned to us, the consumers. And so this was around 1999, early 2000. when looking at this analysis and saying, you know, our products don't stay here in the fields, obviously. And so started looking further up the supply chain, and you can see in the popular education drawing on the far right, one of those early drawings of kind of helping the community and consumers alike understand this dynamic where you have the worker who makes an incredibly low amount of money, the grower who receives money from retailers, who fundamentally receives money from all of us as consumers. And so the CIW began to launch the Campaign for Fair Food, which is a partnership in collaboration between conscious consumers, consumers of faith in particular, as well as students and young people, in a movement led by farm workers in order to try to call on those large retailers to come to the table and to use their market power to change those conditions that have been happening for so long in their supply chain. And so in 2001, the CIW launched its first campaign with Taco Bell, who again you see featured in said drawing as the Chihuahua. And with that, and mostly because they had seen that Taco Bell had entered into a year-round relationship with some of the growers down here in Immokalee, and said, of course, I will buy your product all year round, but I'll buy it for this incredibly low price. So with that consolidation of the market, companies like Taco Bell had an incredible amount of power over not only the types of tomatoes that are picked, the quality, the variety, all of those things, but also fundamentally over the conditions. And so, especially in the absence of real federal protections, the CIW turned to the market and was able to win 14 such agreements with some of the world's largest retailers through marches and rallies and letter writing, to bring these companies to the table to say, I will direct my purchases to companies that are doing the right thing and ensuring farm workers' human rights, preventing things like forced labor. And those agreements also entailed a penny per pound increase in premium that these buyers would pay that will go towards augmenting workers' wages. So that would decrease some of the economic insecurity that we know farm workers suffer. And so the CIW spent nearly a decade building power in the market, winning these agreements in order to establish the Fair Food Program. So I think we can go to the next slide, Julie. And so after winning 9 of those agreements, that essentially brought the growers to the table. So growers who had been resistant for a long time to this kind of change, starting in the Florida tomato industry, saw that, first among consumers, and then as a result, among retailers, there was actually quite a large demand in the market for not only local produce, organic produce, but actually fair produce, fair food. And so with that, almost overnight, the entire was kind of a tipping point. The vast majority of the Florida tomato industry came on board and said, okay, we'll enter into this partnership and figure out how to actually make these rights real. And so the Fair Food Program, of course, now is much larger than its early seeds, but it's had a really transformational impact in the industry. And I'll turn it over to Lupe to describe that transformation.
That's correct. We have accomplished important changes in our workplace. One of the things that right now workers have is, for example, the right to reporting abuses. When something is happening in the ranch, right? They can talk to human resources there in the ranch. They can call the coalition. They can call the Council of Fair Food through the hotline, complaint hotline, which is 24/7. And then the worker is not afraid to report anymore because there's protections in place. Also for women, we're working free from sexual harassment. So no supervisor, contractor, people from the company or colleagues, they're not going to do harassment because they're going to know there's consequences. They're going to protect us as women. And we know that we're implementing the right to take in breaks, especially with the climate change that is happening. So that the worker itself can protect their health and their safety. They can protect this themselves, all the workers. So I don't know if we're gonna pass to the next one, but yes, I mean, right now, what we've accomplished with these agreements in the corporations is implementing the fair food program like we saw in the map prior. On the prior slide, it's expanding to other products, other states. So this program, how it works is we do education sessions from worker to worker. We go to the ranches every season, once or twice, maybe even, to do the educational sessions. And all the workers that are working in this ranch from the Fair Food Program, they apply for this program, right? It doesn't matter what the situation is, the legal situation. It doesn't matter if it's an H-2A worker, they have the same rights. So this is something that is very, very important. We always have to speak to workers directly regarding what are their rights, how can they do any reports. So aside of that, I'm gonna send this over to Marley for the
In addition to the education that workers receive from fellow workers, we also, as the CIW, established a third-party monitoring body because we recognize that education is very important, but we need to make sure that workers have all of the tools possible to be the frontline monitors of their own rights, even as they are in that process. And so we created a body that was dedicated to ensuring the monitoring of this program called the Fair Food Standards Council. And so that organization, as you can see in the image, they do two main things. One are annual seasonal audits of every farm, which are on the ground and are far and away some of the most in-depth audits in a workplace that you'll find globally. They interview at least 50% of the workforce every single time. They have in-depth meetings with management. They have access to being able to review and ensure that proper pay proper pay methods are being implemented to make sure that workers are receiving the minimum wage, that they are receiving their bonus that they get through that premium that's paid by retailers. And then but of course, even the best audit in the entire world can only capture a snapshot in a moment. It's like a very high definition photo of a particular moment. But we know that that's not sufficient, that workers need to be able to report issues as they arise at any point in time. And so we also have a trilingual live 24/7 hotline that the Fair Food Standards Council runs for Fair Food Program farm workers, in which they can report to the same people who do the audits. So they're very familiar with the farms, with the nicknames and the types of crops and the nature of the work and all of those details that are critical in establishing connection and trust with workers who call. And then the Fair Food Standards Council also is tasked with then taking all of that information together with notes from the education team and providing feedback to growers along the way. So saying, these are the areas of our code of conduct that you have met our criteria. These are the areas where you need improvement. These are the measures of improvement we need to see within this time frame. And again, the most important piece of this, and the only reason it really fundamentally works, is because of the participation of retailers and the legally binding agreements that, together with consumers like you all, the coalition has been able to win with, again, some of these large buyers who will put their power behind this program. So at the end of the day, let's say, and Lupe mentioned workers' right to report abuse without fear of retaliation, whether that's an issue around sexual harassment or wage theft, What it comes down to is that from an employer's perspective, someone who owns a farm, is running these farms, if there is a report of sexual harassment, especially if it involves physical touch, because we have a zero tolerance policy for sexual assault, so any kind of sexual harassment that involves physical touch, and that account is substantiated through investigation of the Fair Food Standards Council. If I am part of the Fair Food Program as a grower, and and the Fair Food Standards Council comes to me and says, you have a supervisor, he's been credibly proven to be someone who has sexually assaulted a worker on your crew. And as a result, because of the zero tolerance policy, he must be immediately fired from work. What we have found outside of the Fair Food Program, of course, the typical response would be, it's he said, she said. I'm not sure that that even happened. This is a really important crew leader for me. I've been working with him for years. He brings hundreds of workers to my crew every year. And so without very strong incentives and very strong enforcement, it's actually a huge leap for an employer to essentially fire one of their supervisors based on the investigation of a third-party body. But and of course they do have a choice, but their choice in the context of the Fair Food Program is either I fire that person or I lose the ability to sell to 14 of the world's largest retailers. And so by bringing that market power to the table and being able to have true enforcement through the market and through the power of consumer voice, we're able to make farm workers' human rights real on the ground. And so and the model has proven to be incredibly effective at not only catching issues when they do arise, but as a result, fundamentally preventing them. And that's where it comes in with forced labor, is being able to catch smaller red flags before they tumble into something like a full-blown forced labor case, whether it's someone who's withholding wages or someone who makes verbal threats but has not yet become physical. All of those things are not tolerated in the Fair Food Program, and any supervisor who has repeated offenses is not only fired but blacklisted from the entire program. So we're able to weed out some of the worst offenders in these kinds of cases. But again, all of that is backed up by the power of the market. And so I think we can go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to Lupe. Estás en mudo.
I'm sorry. Yes, we're talking about ranches that are in this program of Fair Food Program. We've seen these changes as workers, but outside of the protections of the program, in other ranches that are not participating, there's a lot of abuses, right? Where there's things continue to happen, the modern slavery, sexual harassment, talking a little bit of heat, other workers that are being exposed and they're risking their life, right? So this is more or less like the numbers, the statistics that have come up as reports, for example, and as studies from Polaris from 2018 to 2020. It says that like the workers call the national hotline for human trafficking, and 73% was agricultural workers, meaning many more than any other industries. So this is something very worrisome. And also there's another report from the Poverty Center in the South that says that 80% of women still face sexual harassment in the agricultural field or in farming. So in a little bit about the heat, we found, or it's been found, the agricultural workers or farm workers are 35 times more likely to die from heat. So this is very, something that worries us a lot. When they are working, they don't have shade, they don't have access to clean water to drink, they don't have this and that. So when the workers, they don't have this, they're not gonna be taking care of their own health because they can't. So because of this, when there's extreme heat, they're risking their lives, right? If you're not hydrating properly, if you're not taking breaks when you should, this is something that is very important, especially right now that every year we're having more and more heat, and the protections are not up to par. They're not arriving for the workers. So this is what works outside of the Fair Food Program, which is something very worrisome because most of the food that we're consuming come from workers that don't have these protections and that are there exposing their lives just to be able to get this food on our tables. So these are just some things that we've seen outside of this Fair Food Program, and this is the reason why we continue to work on our campaign. But there's also some other cases that the coalition has worked, modern slavery cases, like we saw at the beginning. It's decades, it's years, but still we still have slavery in our industry. So now I'm gonna send this over to Marley to speak a little bit about those cases.
And so as Lupe mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of the cases that we saw that we would like to think are historical cases are in fact continuing today. And as Julie underscored, and also one of the statistics that Lupe shared is regarding H-2A workers, which are guest workers on farms, and is becoming swiftly the dominant form of labor provision within American agriculture. It feels somewhat like overnight, and there's a bit of whiplash within the community around the growth of the H-2A program, but unfortunately not a lot of growth in oversight from the government regarding workers' protections. And is slowly changing, but not nearly fast enough to keep up with the growth in the program. And so these are two cases that are fairly recent. The first is the Blooming Onion case, which some may have heard of. It was mostly rooted in Georgia, in southeastern Georgia. And with this case, it was investigated for many years before coming to light. It became a public case when an indictment dropped in 2021 that had 24 defendants in one indictment, all of whom were arrested basically in one day. And so it's a very large operation that was also partially prosecuted under RICO laws because of the level of conspiracy happening across many different crew leaders and tax filers and even some low-level government officials in the state of Georgia. And essentially, the workers in this case involved over 70,000 fraudulently petitioned visas. 2 workers died of heat stress. In this case, workers were housed in horrifying housing conditions, often packed into small and decrepit facilities that may or may not have beds, often roach infested, with sewage leaking inside of the housing operations. There were hundreds of workers who were witnesses and survivors in this case, which, again, if you have any familiarity with these types of cases, all of these numbers are absolutely astonishing. This is a huge scale case and is very much still ongoing. Of course, with an indictment in 2021, given the pace of our justice system, that case is very much still in process. There's quite a bit to do, but really was a horrifying case. There were workers who were sold, from one person to another for $30,000, a whole group of workers in Indiana. And so it was fundamentally, it is a game changer of a case. And I know that certainly one of the hopes of the prosecutor is that it can be an illustrative case for why the H-2A program is so fundamentally vulnerable to this type of exploitation, in which workers are charged high amounts of money when they first come in, and then forced to work those off, to work off those debts, sometimes at gunpoint. The second case has come to a full conclusion. So this case began, we actually received the initial call for this case at the CIW's office. This case initially emerged just a couple of hours from here in a small town called Pahokee, which is near Lake Okeechobee. And there were two workers who were being held in the facility that you can see pictured here. It's an old hotel with a warehouse behind it, surrounded by barbed wire. Two workers were able to escape in the trunk of a car of a lunch lady, and they were able to make it to a safe location and then contacted the CIW for support in figuring out what to do next. We were able to successfully refer the case to law enforcement, and the task force and the Palm Beach area and Tampa area did an excellent job in following up on this case. That was reported in 2016. And so the case did not come to a full conclusion until 2022. The principal in this case was Vladimir Moreno, and he was sentenced to almost a decade in prison for conspiracy to commit forced labor, as well as a variety of other crimes. He forced workers to work in incredibly challenging conditions for very little money, again, in very poor housing, and often would threaten workers or their families if they tried to leave or wanted to, again, to leave before supposedly paying off the debts that they owed him. And so, again, these are just two cases that unfortunately are the tip of the iceberg. This is, especially with the rapid growth of the Fair Food Program, the rapid growth of the H-2A program and the need for more protections that are not yet in place in those places where workers are arriving really has set us up for in the next decade major challenges in ensuring workers' human rights in our agricultural system, which again, as Lupe explained in the first slide of our presentation, this has been something that's been going on for many years. And we've seen that programs like the Fair Food Program, the Milk with Dignity Program, which is in dairy up in Vermont, that have that market power have really been proven to root out a lot of these types of cases. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to campaign. So the CIW, of course, began campaigning in order to bring on some of these major buyers. And we continue to campaign today in order to bring on more. Because we would really like to see protections as strong as the Fair Food Program available not only to the tens of thousands of workers in the 10 states that we currently cover today, but to see those protections available to all farm workers in the U.S. And for that, the level of heat stress protections and prevention of sexual harassment and assault and prevention of forced labor to become the norm. And so the thing I'll leave you with before turning it back over to Julie is ways that you can get involved, ways to support the CIW's work in particular. You're welcome to scan and get more information from the QR code on the screen. But just to name a few of those, one is mobilizing in your own community. Again, this is a movement that is built on the leadership of farm workers, but that has harnessed the power of conscious consumers. And we've seen that has an incredible impact in being able to transform our food system, even with a small number of very committed and vocal consumers. We can really make a difference. And so there's a lot of different ways to support in your own community, spreading the word, inviting CIW to do a presentation, hearing what the most, the current campaigns right now are with the Wendy's boycott, which is a national boycott, of course, of Wendy's, which is the only major fast food company that has not joined the Fair Food Program. Why they have refused to join the program is is anybody's guess, because they've certainly held out for a really long time, and all of their competitors are already in the program. Their public response is that there's no crossover between their tomato supply chain and the Fair Food Program, which is, even in its most generous form, quite an outdated statement, but also just fundamentally misunderstands the chicken and the egg question of the Fair Food Program. It was, right now, Wendy's buys their tomatoes from greenhouses. And of course, as you saw on the map, even everyone in this webinar can already tell Wendy's that, first of all, the Fair Food Program isn't just tomatoes, but also the reason that it was established in new places is because of the leadership and commitment of retailers. And so Wendy's is more than welcome to bring the Fair Food Program to the suppliers in their supply chain, whether in tomatoes or elsewhere. And so that's their principal response right now, is that there is, quote, no nexus between the Fair Food Program's covered crops and their supply chain. What they fail to mention is that that is their fault. The other things that you can do in order to support this work is coming to do delegations here in Immokalee. We welcome people to come down to our wonderful town. We have a beautiful community center really at the heart of our work. And we're always happy to welcome people here. We do have a sustainer program so that we can have, we're all 100% independently funded, including the third-party body that does not take money from growers and does not take donations from retailers. And so becoming a sustainer is a huge way to help. And we also have invited smaller scale retailers such as co-ops, small scale restaurants that maybe don't have the buying power of a Whole Foods or a Walmart or a Taco Bell, but nevertheless have a great deal of resonance with our work. And so there are ways for other smaller retailers to be involved as well. And so I'll pause there and send it back to Julie. And again, happy to answer any questions that people have.
Yeah, real quick, speaking of questions, we do have a few in the Q&A, and we will get to those live here in just a little bit, but I wanted to encourage everyone else, if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A section so we can answer that live here in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Marley and Lupe, for talking about this and sharing these things with you. I was just reading an article in the Wisconsin Examiner that Rose had sent me about human trafficking in Wisconsin, dairy workers up there, and how long it took to finally go to court. And then once it did go to court, it was a slap on the hand. It wasn't commensurate with what should have been handed out. And then Wisconsin dealing with a large number of workers that were in Georgia and convinced to go to Wisconsin, and they were H-2A workers. As soon as they left the state, they were out of compliance with U.S. regulations around H-2A. They got all these assurances that they'd be okay, and then they were just forced to work long hours, 7 days a week, that kind of thing. And this is still, we're still just figuring out how to pursue this and stop it, but programs like the Fair Food Program can literally eliminate it in a lot of places. We're grateful for that. So we just wanted to say a few things about taking action, as an organization, because not every farm worker is covered by the Fair Food Program, and in other places, there are lots of struggles. So we want to see that program grow, and then at the same time, we want to work on ways that we can help farm workers. So one of ours is to encourage people to press their congressional representatives about immigration reform that includes a meaningful path to citizenship for folks that are working in this country and helping to provide our food. And there are other legislative opportunities to take advantage of. You can find these on our website under Take Action. We actually have a set of legislation that we're promoting. For example, heat stress regulations for the entire country. They've been enacted in a few states, but states like Florida, states like Texas, states like Arizona, Alabama, and Georgia, even the state where I am in North Carolina, no regulations around heat stress. And it becomes one of the leading causes of death for farm workers who don't have adequate hydration, shade, or meaningful rest. So there's a piece of legislation in Congress we would like to see passed. We're supporting a ban organophosphates piece of legislation, specific types of pesticides that farm workers can be exposed to and that can harm them neurologically, specifically women and children. And so I just invite you, I'm not going to go in depth about those, but just invite you to go to our website to learn more about those and how you can take action on those. Of course, we support farm worker campaigns like boycotting Wendy's, like promoting the Fair Food Program. We also support one of their sister organizations, Migrant Justice in Vermont, who's been working with dairy workers and has a food certification program for milk called Milk with Dignity, but for dairy products up there, they have been, they won a campaign like CIW won the early campaign with Taco Bell and several since then. The Migrant Justice won a campaign with Ben and Jerry's initially, and now they're focused on Hannaford Supermarkets, which is a very popular supermarket chain up in the Northeast. And so there are ways that you can get involved with that. You can find those on our website. We support both of those food certification programs, and there's other food certifications that we also support, the Equitable Food Initiative, the Agricultural Justice Project, which are oriented differently, but are trying to make improvements for farm workers in different parts of the country. And so we want to encourage you to go to our website, in the drop-down menu, go to the Take Action, and you can find out more about these programs, and you can get updates as we find other opportunities to accompany farm workers in improving these sorts of things. So Rose, let's take questions.
Yeah, so we have quite a few, so let's try to be as quick as we can in answering some of these. The first one is, what was the incentive for retailers and companies like Taco Bell to join Fair Food program?
So I'll take that one. So the broader campaign for fair food is what brought those companies to the table. So every company has a bit of a different story, but there was a variety of types of action. So rallies, tours, public pressure essentially is really what brought them to the table, and shareholder activism. So it really takes a great deal of effort and activation by consumers together with farm workers. And so all of that was done with the CIW leading the way and consumers standing at their side.
Yeah, this next question is for anyone who can answer. They want to know about debt bondage and if that's very common, I guess, here in the US for labor trafficking and modern slavery and agriculture.
Yes, extremely common.
And maybe you might tell people what debt bondage is. Not
Sure.
everyone might know that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, and Julie, feel free to also weigh in, but I know that this has been a longstanding tool for employers to control their employees. So basically, in having employees incur a large amount of debt. In the past, that was often done through company stores. So if you were living out on a rural farm, you would have to go and you would, have to buy all of your food, drink, basic goods from the very same people who were employing you, and they would charge such high amounts that you would just constantly get deeper and deeper into debt because you would have to pay more to survive than what you were paid. And because of that debt, they would claim that you were not allowed to change jobs, you're not allowed to go anywhere until your debt is paid. Today with H-2A workers, that often takes the form of illegal recruitment fees, where workers are charged thousands of US dollars prior to being able to procure the visa, which is completely illegal. And then that debt is held over their heads while they are here.
they're often charged transportation fees, housing fees, lots of those things that are supposed to be provided through the H-2A program, and they don't know that. And yeah, it's exactly the same thing. It's not returned to them. There was a big battle in North Carolina a number of years ago about the transportation fees, and farm workers were supposed to be reimbursed transportation fees from their place of origin into the state. And so the growers or their labor contractors were waiting till the end of the season to do that. And so many times they were putting a lot of money up front and they couldn't afford that. And so at least through the North Carolina Growers Association here in the state, it has to be returned, I think, within the first 2 weeks or the first month that they're here, any cost incurred in getting here. But, yeah.
Next question, how can other agricultural justice, community organizing groups support farm workers? And also I'm inferring supporting ending human trafficking in agriculture.
Sí.
Yes, well, I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. I think that being in solidarity with workers, like Julie mentioned, right? There's several groups that have these campaigns that this is a way in which one can support, right? For example, us, like we mentioned, we have these campaigns, we have Kroger campaigns as well. So you all can come to our actions. We can do presentations. We're always wanting to learn from other groups. What is it that they're doing? I think this is a way in which we can be like in solidarity, like supporting each other, because yes, this is very needed. There's a lot of work that is needed to be able to bring justice to the workers. And all this that we're seeing, all this is just like, we're just looking at it as through a small lens. It's obviously something bigger because our industry is bigger, something very big. So we always need to be aware, especially when we are buying food, right? Where does the food come from? What are the conditions that this worker faces? How is it that we are as consumers can help for the workers to have protection? So this is something that we can all do, and we have to learn from these campaigns. We have to organize in our communities so that we know, so that we are in solidarity with our workers.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
oh, go ahead.
Well,
Sorry, Julie.
I was just going to say, absolutely. The agribusiness system it's a monstrosity. So many of us don't even realize where our food's coming from. So I think a smaller piece of agricultural justice is also to support farming within the area where you live, to particularly support small Black, Indigenous, people of color farms in the area, your local farmers market, where you're more in touch directly with the farmers and the farms that feed your area. It's not enough because all of it, we live in seasonal places and a lot of things are brought from so many other places. So in those larger scales, food certification programs like this are essential because it's so far from us. But I think within our communities, the small steps we can take to learn where our food comes from and to support those smaller efforts is another way to be in touch with, and what are the barriers to the success of those small farmers too.
The next question is somewhat similar, but a little different. How might a small town southeastern restaurant get involved? So, and right now they're currently buying in part food from Cisco Food. So how can a restaurant support farm workers?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I would underscore what Julie just said about being thoughtful in sourcing. I think that and making sure to promote that. I know that I always feel like I learn a lot at the restaurants that not only partner with small local farmers or farmers from a marginalized background, but also educate consumers about where that food is coming from and through their menu, through their through everything that's in their restaurant. We also, as I mentioned briefly, have started a relatively new program, but that I think is very promising for the Fair Food Program specifically. So we've gotten a lot of requests from co-ops and small restaurants and grocers who are interested in sourcing fair food produce and sharing that with consumers because they see it as very, connecting with their own mission and something that they don't have, the buying power to be a traditional participating buyer, but nevertheless want to participate. And so those are fair food sponsors, and we have an entire. I'm happy to share those resources, but they're also on the Fair Food Program website. If someone's interested in becoming a sponsor, they can reach out to us. And essentially, it just involves educating consumers, making an annual support payment to provide another independent source of funding for the monitoring, so for the audits and the trilingual support line. And then also a portion of that monitoring payment actually goes directly to farm workers' wages through the premium. So that's the infrastructure that we've set up for those types of entities, and would love to have more and more of them join.
Well, and I would urge people, if you're getting your food through Cisco or another entity like that, then ask them, can you begin to source all your food from Fair Food so that we can take advantage of that? And the more demand there is from small restaurants, small grocers, whatever, it just grows. It grows.
And the last question, they're wondering about the statistic of American-born workers working in farm labor compared to people born outside of USA. I know I can quickly answer this one, sort of according to the last agricultural workers survey, which is just a kind of a small caption of workers in agricultural, so bear that in mind. But that was 70% were foreign born. I do also want to share that this year, the National Farm Worker Ministry is putting out a lot of educational resources about immigration. So if you do have additional questions, please check back on our website about mid-April, where we will have answered something like a question like that, and then many others about immigration, because this person also wanted to have those statistics to be able to educate other people in their community. So I love that question. If somebody else wants to quickly add to that. Nope. Okay, I did want to encourage everyone to connect with both CIW and NFWM on social media. This is, where we post new information. And so if you want to stay up to date on what's going on, then please connect with us, follow us, share our content, encourage other people to connect with us as well. And thank you so much for being with us today and sharing in this information.
Thank you, Lupe and Marley. Really great to see you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you all.
Have a wonderful day.
Happy Farm Worker Awareness Week.